Well, I'm working on a lot of things now. I have shifted my own research mostly into the area of cultural evolution because I'm convinced, as are my colleagues, that we are not going to solve the gigantic problems humanity faces without getting real changes in culture and behavior.
And I will say one thing, and I may come as a shock to people, this pandemic has been very severe. It's spread around the world extremely quickly. It has affected every corner of this planet. But this is not necessarily the big one. This virus is very transmissible, and it kills people, and it has deprived so many people of loved ones. But its current case fatality is reasonably low in comparison to other emerging diseases. This is a wake-up call. We are learning now how to do things better, how to do science better, how to do logistics better, how to do training better, how to do governance better, how to communicate better. We've developed a whole new science of infodemiology and advanced behavioral science in this way. This is a wake-up call. We are learning now how to do things better, how to do governance better, how to communicate better, and advanced behavioral science in this way.
We are not going to solve the gigantic problems humanity faces without getting real changes in culture and behavior. Real changes in culture and behavior.
And advanced behavioral science in this way.
Real changes in culture and behavior.
And advanced behavioral science in this way. This is a wake-up call.
We've got to have cultural evolution so that we start treating each other and the environment upon which we all depend much better. And so it's a matter of behavioral change, but we don't know anywhere near as much about cultural evolution, that is evolution in our non-genetic information, as we do in Darwinism, which is evolution in our genetic.
It's a very pertinent question to ask, how do we build back better?
To build back better or whatever.
We have a chance to reset the clock and build back better than before.
To build back better than before.
Remember the terrible damage of COVID as we try to build back from this global pandemic.
Joe Biden calls it Build Back Better.
Build back better.
Building back better.
To do things differently. To build back better.
We're going to build it back better.
And build it back better.
It's my plan to build back better.
Start taking all the problems that have been created in education and mental health and start to build back in a positive way.
I have launched a booklet called Build Back Better, Britain After Coronavirus.
It's about building this country back better.
Growing conspiracy following it. It is called the Great Reset.
An unprecedented opportunity to rethink and reset the ways in which we live.
The great opportunity for reset.
The theory even calls Mr. Biden's campaign slogan, Build Back Better, a front for the conspiracy.
Build back better.
Building back better our economy.
Build back better.
All elements of the Great Reset are fundamental to building the future we need.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
It's a big effort some would say to build back better. We would say to really have a great reset.
Conspiracy, conspiracy.
Conspiracy.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Glad so many of you are aboard. We've got a big job ahead of us. I want to thank all those people who have helped and worked so hard in the Iowa State University Environmental Teach-In. But this, as you all must recognize, is just the beginning. We've got a long ways to go. We're going to need all of your help. So let's get on with it and see what we have to do in the years ahead. We're very fortunate today to have Dr. Paul R. Ehrlich, population ecologist from Stanford University, to show the way for the future. Dr. Ehrlich is the author of the population bomb, which was instrumental in getting this whole thing started.
What I'm going to try and do is summarize my view of the current bind that we're in. I think people like to know how they got into trouble when they're trying to figure out how to get out. It's the first time, 10,000 years ago, then mankind began seriously to disturb the ecology of the planet. It's very difficult to come to grips with the fact that we have 3.6 billion people today and a growth rate of 2% at compound interest. The numbers are just too large. What does it mean? Well, it means a lot of things. By every standard that we've been able to find, it means that we already have between 3 and 7 times more people on the planet than we can permanently support. The only reason we're able to support 3.6 billion people, mostly in slums and in misery, is that we're doing something that few businessmen would approve of, and that is we're burning our capital. We are destroying our fossil fuels, we are dispersing our mineral resources, and so on. A game which cannot continue for much longer. So we're already wildly overpopulated. toxification of the planet, maybe it's related to consumption, of course, crap we put on our farm fields and our big monocultures, but toxification may be a worse problem. Why? And I'm not sure, yes or no, but we've spread toxic substances all over the planet. And at least with climate change, we've got crackpot ideas for what to do if we don't get the greenhouse gas emissions down. How many of you know the story of bisphenol A? Almost all these hard plastic sports bottles are giving you all a dose of hormones, which may actually be more effective at small doses than large. We don't know. There are these weird signs, for instance, in subarctic villages, in some places now, there are twice as many girl babies born as boy babies. And there are stories of, I shouldn't say stories, there are reports of decline in sperm viability in men. But the point is, when you start dosing everybody with weird hormones in combinations you have no idea what the effects are going to be, if you find out one of them is really bad, there's not even a crackpot scheme to come up with to cure it. We have little idea of their direct effect on human beings, no idea of their effect on other organisms, and no ideas of their synergistic, possible synergistic effects, one-way, two-way, three-way, n-1 over n times n-1 over 2 ways. In other words, you have a lot of interactions. If you have 10,000 chemicals out there, no way you can test them. I think, obviously, some of these things we need to do. In other words, what kind of society we have, you can't avoid letting some stuff out into the environment.
It's a dictation and it's a definition on how we live it, on how we live it. It's a dictation and it's a definition on how we live it, on how we live it. It's a dictation and it's a definition on how we live it, 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 on how we live it. It's a dictation and it's a definition on how we live it, 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 on how we live it.
If we don't address climate change, the chances are that we will roll back many of the development gains that we have achieved during the last 20-30 years. If we don't address climate change, it will be either more difficult to achieve these goals or actually impossible to achieve them. It is getting increasingly difficult, but it is still possible to reach the overall goal of keeping global temperature rise below 2 degrees, but we have to act very fast and we have to put in place all the emission reduction possibilities that we have looked at and do that as soon as possible. All of those have impacts on climate change, and when the negotiators see that in fact countries are willing to do all that, they will be more positively inclined to agreeing to ambitious targets.
This is a wake-up call. We are learning
now how to do things better.
Real changes in culture and behavior.
And advance behavioral science in this way.
Real changes in culture and behavior.
Billy, how likely or how possible do you think it is that our civilization might actually be facing a collapse?
I think it's that we're facing it is 100%. Ann and I were just at a meeting in Switzerland of an international group, primarily scientists. Everybody accepts we're headed directly for a crash. In other words, the business as usual takes us no place else. There's no question about that. The big issues being looked at, say, at the study of existential risks at Cambridge University and so on, is are there any ways we can soften the collapse? What actual form will it take? And will it take a form that will allow us to do a reset of some sort afterwards? And what form will the reset take that will avoid just going down the same old route to yet another collapse?
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
The first speaker is the managing director of IMF, International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva. And you, Kristalina, were with us when we launched the Great Reset. That's also our theme for our annual meeting in Davos in May next year. And looking now at the stimulus that are put forward, are we really using this great opportunity to build more resilient, green, and socially equitable societies?
To answer your question, let me start with where we are and where we are headed in the world economy and how that translates into actions countries pursue. Where we are, as you said, we put the floor under the world economy, remarkable actions by governments and central banks. And at that stage, we really didn't have to be differentiating between potentially winners and losers. It is a floor for everyone.
I don't think we're out of the woods yet. Hopefully, we will see more V's, less U's, no W's or L's, but I think we're also faced with K's. Technology going up, and then we see some of the traditional industry going down.
I'm delighted we have Anne Richards from Fidelity International joining us from Edinburgh. And Anne, you know, your business is managing hundreds of billions of dollars worth of assets. What can business do to really move the needle on this sustainable, resilient recovery? Can it go further and faster than perhaps even some countries and governments can go?
I think the short answer to that is yes, that it can. And what we have, I think, seen through this crisis is almost like a concertinaing effect. You've seen time compressed. Things which we thought could take a very long time have happened very, very quickly. Two things I think that have really focused minds. The first is that realization that the survival of any business is not a given. I think there's always an implicit assumption that any business model can continue in perpetuity. And this crisis has shown that there can be external shocks which put a whole business model, indeed a whole industry business model, into doubt. And that's really shaken up a lot of thinking around about that. But the converse of that is that it's also shown us all, I think, that the radical can be much easier to achieve than we ever imagined it could be. We're all very guilty of proximity bias, of status quo bias. We think where we are and incremental changes rather than great leaps. And yet, if you look at the history of companies, if you look at the history of the S&P 500 or the history of the of the FTSE 100, you can see actually that the companies that are the constituents of that have changed radically over time. So radical happens more often than we think. It's just we are conditioned not to think that we can do it. The thing from this that business can do is grasp the opportunity of reinvention that is being offered to it through this. The fact that we've had tremendously rapid central bank support and tremendously rapid fiscal support from IMF, from governments, from local governments, has meant that business has been given a great opportunity to do that reinvention. And what we have to be very careful about doing is that we do not lose that opportunity, not just to rebuild the past. Rebuilding the past is not going to be an answer to this. This crisis that we're in, the virus that we are fighting, it's not going to be one and done. There's no magic bullet. Great if one turns up, but that shouldn't be your central hypothesis. So we're going to be in a world of waves. We're going to be a world of going forward, moving back a little bit. We have to reinvent business models, and we have to reinvent what the future of work looks like within that. That gives us the opportunity to think about how we build in sustainability and resilience into survivability of those new business models. And resilience and sustainability are completely interlinked. If you're not resilient, you will not be sustainable. If you're not sustainable, you will not be resilient. So I think that's the conversation that business is able to have now and should be having now. And that will take us on the path to building back better, to building back greener, which is, I think, what we're all hoping we can bring as the good out of this very difficult period that we've been through.
A groove. Well, a groove is the coordination of different rhythms. A lot of what we hear today has a beat. Now, don't confuse a beat with a groove, because a beat is actually one moment in the life of a groove. Here's an example of a beat. This is the same thing repeated over and over and over again with almost no change. Now the rhythms of the groove are always changing.
Today's landmark report should leave you in no doubt about the links between extreme weather and climate change. And to prevent it becoming unpredictably dangerous, say the scientists, we have to keep warming below 1.5 degrees.
Limiting warming to 1.5 degrees is not impossible, but will require unprecedented transitions in all aspects of society.
We're already at 1 degree of warming. With emissions carrying on as they are, we could hit 1.5 in less than 12 years.
Today's report certainly poses a challenge to all of us, but from what I can see that the real economy is doing in most countries, I'm actually still confident that we have the technology, that we have the wherewithal, that we have the finance to be able to live up to this challenge.
Christiana Figueres has reason to be optimistic. In 2016, she persuaded 195 countries to meet in Paris and agree to halt global warming. But to steer the world's economy away from diesel and into electric, wean it off coal and into renewables, give up land where we grow food to soak up carbon from the atmosphere, will take much more than optimism.
Well, I'm working on a lot of things now. I have shifted my own research mostly into the area of cultural evolution because I'm convinced, as are my colleagues, that we are not going to solve the gigantic problems humanity faces without getting real changes in culture and behavior. We've got to have
Check yourself.
How to do governance better, how to communicate better. We developed a whole new science of infodemiology and advanced behavioral science in this way. This is a wake-up call. We are learning now how to do things better.
Simple, yet so complex.
No one
can ignore a gathering force that is reshaping the future of every member of this assembly. There has been nothing like it in history. When I think of the great scientific revolutions of the past, print, the steam engine, aviation, the atomic age, I think of new tools that we acquired, but over which we, the human race, had the advantage, which we control. And that is not necessarily the case in the digital age. Smart cities will pullulate with sensors, all joined together by the Internet of Things. Bollards communing invisibly with lampposts, so there is always a parking space for your electric car, so that no bin goes unemptied, no street unswept. But this technology could also be used to keep every citizen under round-the-clock surveillance. A future Alexa will pretend to take orders, but this Alexa will be watching you, clucking her tongue and stamping her foot. In future, voice connectivity will be in every room and almost every object. Your mattress will monitor your nightmares, your fridge will beep for more cheese, your front door will sweep wide the moment you approach like some silent butler. Your smart meter will go hustling of its own accord for the cheapest electricity, and every one of them minutely transcribing your every habit in tiny electronic shorthand, stored not in their chips or in their innards, nowhere you can find it, but in some great cloud of data that lowers ever more oppressively over the human race. A giant, dark thundercloud waiting to burst, and we have no control over how or when the precipitation will take place. And every day that we tap on our phones or work on our iPads, as I see some of you are doing now, we not only leave our indelible spoor in the ether, but we are ourselves becoming a resource, click by click, tap by tap. Just as the Carboniferous period created the indescribable wealth, leaf by decaying leaf, of hydrocarbons, data is the crude oil of the modern economy. And we're now in an environment where we don't know who should own these new oil fields. We don't know who should have the rights or the title to these gushers of cash, and we don't know who decides how to use that data. And can these algorithms be trusted with our lives and hopes? Should the machines, and only the machines, decide whether or not we are eligible for a mortgage or insurance, or what surgery or medicines we should receive? Are we doomed to a cold and heartless future in which computer says yes or computer says no, with the grim finality of an emperor in the arena? Today, people who are still actually anti-science, a whole movement called the anti-vaxxers, who refuse to acknowledge the evidence that vaccinations have eradicated smallpox, and who by their prejudices are actually endangering the very children they want to protect. And I totally reject this anti-scientific pessimism. I'm profoundly optimistic about the ability of new technology to serve as a liberator and to remake the world wondrously and benignly. Indeed, in countless respects, technology is already doing just that. Nanotechnology, I mentioned earlier, revolutionizing medicine by designing robots a fraction of the size of a red blood cell, capable of swimming through our bodies, dispensing medicine and attacking malignant cells like some Star Wars armada. African countries, millions of people without bank accounts can now transfer money using a simple app. They can buy solar energy and leap in one transaction from no electricity to green power. And new advances are making renewable energy ever cheaper, aiding our common struggle against climate change. Our understanding of the natural world is being transformed by genome sequencing, the discovery of the very essence of life itself, the secret genetic code that animates the spirit of every living being and allows medical breakthroughs the like of which we have never known. Treatments tailored to the precise genetic makeup of the individual. So far, we have discovered the secrets of less than 0.3% of complex life on the planet. Think what will we achieve, what we will achieve when. And it is a matter of when. we understand 1 or 2%, let alone 5 or 10%. At stake is whether we bequeath an Orwellian world designed for censorship and repression and control, or a world of emancipation, debate and learning, where technology threatens famine and disease, but not our freedoms. Month by month, vital decisions are being taken in academic committees, company boardrooms, and industry standards groups. They are writing the rule books of the future, making ethical judgments, choosing what will or will not be rendered possible. Together, we need to ensure that new advances reflect our values by design. There is excellent work being done in the EU, the Commonwealth, and of course, the UN, which has a vital role in ensuring that no country is excluded from the wonderful benefits of this technology and the industrial revolution it is bringing about. But we must be still more ambitious. We need to find the right balance between freedom and control, between innovation and regulation, between private enterprise and government oversight. We must insist that the ethical judgments inherent in the design of new technology are transparent to all. Above all, we need to agree a common set of global principles to shape the norms and standards that will guide the development of emerging technologies. Are the biggest tech sector, by far the biggest tech sector, fintech, biotech, edtech, medtech, nanotech, green tech, every kind of tech in London. The biggest tech sector anywhere in Europe. Perhaps 500,000 people working in tech alone. Together, we will vanquish killer diseases, eliminate famine, protect the environment, and transform our cities. Success will depend, now as ever, on freedom, openness, and pluralism. The formula that not only emancipates the human spirit, but releases the boundless ingenuity and inventiveness of mankind.
This year at RSA, I am delighted to be able to combine both of these careers and go into an area that I think attendees will find very interesting, because while people tend to think of cybersecurity people as kind of boring fuddy-duddies, we are actually very devious, creative people. And so my session, Cyber Influence, talks about the use of the cyber world for psychological operations. And Sun Tzu was the first real classic strategist to realize the importance of influence as a weapon of warfare. Most of the other generals are all in favor of what we call kinetic war, blowing things up, killing people. Sun Tzu realized if you got the enemy to surrender without firing a shot, that was the epitome of success. A cyber war generally does not have a declaration of war, and while the law of armed combat, a generic body of international law, as well as various conventions such as the Geneva Convention, cover aspects of conventional, traditional war, there is no similar thing, similar body of law for cyber war. The nub of my session really looks at merging what we call cyber war with psychological operations, or PSYOP. And PSYOP has been around for quite some time, and it is what is called non-kinetic warfare, sometimes put under the rubric of information operations, where information operations include all of the elements, the components of a force that influence. That would be public affairs, that would be civil military operations, that would include electronic warfare or jamming, as well as cyberspace operations that we've discussed, DDoS attacks and the like, and most importantly, PSYOP, psychological operations. PSYOP in traditional warfare can take the same format as many of your marketing departments have. engaging in buying advertising space, buying TV time, radio time, and of course exercising messages on the social media, particularly Facebook and Twitter.
Growth is a disease, not the cure, and our problem is how do we get the redistribution that's necessary. Obviously, there are a lot of people on this planet that need more growth, but as I've mentioned before, there are a lot of people in our society who don't need any more growth. And one of the things that John Holder and I started talking about, and Ann, 30 or 40 years ago, is what we call de-development, not development. And that was to reduce the pressure that the rich people are putting on the planet to make room for the poor people to have growth that they need in order to have eventually something like a sustainable society, although like some of you, I've learned to despise the word sustainable because it's attached to things like sustainable growth, which of course is biophysically impossible. We didn't get Krugman to come. If he had come, I'd have asked him, for example, even in the areas he's interested in, why doesn't he have a research program looking into the costs of inequity? How much does it cost us not to treat women the same way that we treat men? How much does it cost us to keep Islamists out of the country if we possibly can? How much does it cost us the continuing racism that we face? But what really has pleased me is that I've heard a long series now of excellent papers by people even caring that I would consider to be junior, people who are young, who are getting into the area, who are beginning to develop brand new ideas. And I think in a sense that's much more important than how many old farts you can drag out here, because they won't change their minds anyway. You won't change my mind and so on, but young people can change their minds, and that's an important thing. As we focus very strongly on climate change. If you look, I think, at the Journal of Ecological Economics, I'll bet you half the articles in one way or another are tied to climate change. And climate change is one of the truly great threats to us, but at least in the general public, and I'm talking now about the big thing, because I'd like to see the great young people we have here talking more to the general public. By the end of the century, even making some big assumptions about a lot of premature deaths, we're still going to have at least 7.5 billion people on the planet. Does that mean we should ignore the population situation? Of course not. What kinds of things can we do? First of all, we can make a lot of women's lives better by seeing to it that they have full education and equal rights with men, and that will change their attitude towards childbearing, and the TFR will go down. You can also provide everybody with modern contraception and backup abortion. That would bring the TFR down. Ethical view in society. For about the last 20 years, the ethical view among educated people is you limit yourself to 2 children. It's now clear that if we're going to ever get to a reasonable population size, ethical people should be limiting themselves to 1 child. Now, my generation could have had 2, but luckily we only had 1, so I can consider myself ethical still. But in that aspect, yes. And another thing which is missed all the time, with a collapse coming, with at least all of my colleagues think there's probably no way at all to get out of it, you could easily have, if everybody behaved ethically, say 500 million people that would not go through the collapse because they would be born afterwards. After all, if we want to have the maximum of human beings live, we keep Homo sapiens going for several million years, not see if we can exterminate civilization and maybe even ourselves in the next few decades. So I think that's a critical area, and I hope that the young people that are here and working on such interesting problems will put 10% of their time tied to their profession, trying to find ways to get the big issues out into public discourse. We don't need lots of growth in the United States. In the United States, we need lots of redistribution. We do not need growth. It's much worse in the United States than it is in, say, Nigeria or Bangladesh or anywhere else. The book that we've written on the jaw problem, it's an example, again, of a public health problem that's not all that hard to solve, except for human beings. In other words, there's no question at all that we're undergoing a vast extinction event. There's also no question that it's caused essentially entirely by human activities. The first reason that we value biodiversity is what it does for the very species that is causing the extinction event. So a little bit of irony. And what it boils down to is when we are killing off biodiversity, we're sawing off the limb that we're sitting on. Intensely stupid, no question about it, and hardly paid any attention to. But for me, and I think most of my colleagues, unfortunately not for everybody, there's also a large ethical reason for preserving biodiversity. I didn't mention the spiritual and aesthetic services we get, but even beyond them, a lot of us feel that we have an ethical duty to protect the only other life forms we know that we share the universe with. For instance, for me, I'm a carnivore, but it's led me to think very hard about whether I still want to eat meat. And I'm pleased to say that one of the best statements on the ethical issues came from Pope Francis. If I can quote from Laudato Si, it's probably I mispronounced it. Each year sees the disappearance of thousands of plant and animal species which we will never know, which our children will never see, because they have been lost forever. The great majority become extinct for reasons related to human activity. Because of us, thousands of species will no longer give glory to God by their very existence, nor convey their message to us. We have no such right, and I would say, amen.
For the people who don't know the World Resources Institute, we are a global research organization that spans more than 60 countries. And we have a range of international offices where, and through that, we work with leaders turning big ideas into action at the nexus of environment, economic opportunity, and human well-being. And the Ross Center for Sustainable Cities has a focus on cities and how to create more accessible, equitable, and healthy, resilient urban area. Cities are at the epicenter of the crisis. We have seen from Wuhan to New York to Nairobi the enormous impacts that the crisis continues to have on the lives of people.
Thank you very much, Roger. Good afternoon from Nairobi colleagues. This is our new normal now. So immediately after that, we know that it's the pandemic been announced for the COVID-19. We came out with the key messages. You can have this in our the link from our website. We have the overall key messages about this pandemic, about how is it affect the people and also in the cities in different parts of the world. We even came out with the guidelines on the informal settlement. How do we deal with informal settlement, on housing, and also on transport. And at the same time, immediately we have, of course, we are a small organization, we are small funding. We managed to get 1.3 million seed funding for scaling up project in 13 countries. And this project in 13 countries is mainly more providing for the basic services, basic amenities to the people. We are also contributed to the UN framework for immediate socio-economic response that was launched by the Secretary General, and also develop our own UN Habitat policy and program framework. And of course, this participated in this webinar with UCLG, World Enable, World Economic Forum, and now with WRI to enable experience sharing between mayors, local government, and all other stakeholders like NGOs and the communities. And we are also looking into how we can provide urban data, mapping and knowledge for informed decision making to these stakeholders and to the local government, because data is very important in order for them to make a decision. Over 95% of the cases in urban areas, 1 billion people live in informal settlement and slum, in overcrowded and inadequate housing. 2.4 billion people lack adequate access to safe, water and sanitation, all the detailed plans, all the detailed proposal, and all the location, specific location and people that we need to work with. It's quite a detailed and comprehensive, but we need help and partners to scale up, because we are catalytic agency. We want partners to scale up and to help the people on the ground. I have already set up one task force to look at the priorities in the post-COVID world. First, as we have to rethink the state, reorganizing local governance mechanism. We cannot work as normal. We cannot make the decision as normal. So we have to rethink the state of how to reorganize the local government mechanism. And second is how we can address the increase of poverty and the exacerbation of inequalities in cities. And the third is on the rethinking of urban morphology and typologies, creating new evidence on density and compactness. Are we planning the future cities, or the existing cities after COVID-19 is still the same? That's how we have to do rethinking in the urban morphology and typology. And the last, number 4, is that how we can reduce the risk of failure of the current urban economy business model, to come up with just very good document to help the communities, to help the local government, and to help the countries during the after the COVID, the post-COVID world, or post-COVID-19. But we don't know when. But of course, I hope that it's very soon. But I was told that it will be quite take some time for us to look into the mechanism to end this COVID-19 scenario.
Thank you so much. This was great, and this was, I mean, it's setting the agenda very clearly. Thank you very much for this brief but in-depth overview of priorities.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. At the World Bank, President Malpass has basically mentioned that we are mobilizing 160 billion over the coming 15 months, which is basically trying to put all sorts of resources available towards this unprecedented pandemic. And the focus of our interventions is on 4 different pillars. And the first is obviously at the emergency level is the public health emergency. The second pillar of the intervention is obviously the focus on the poor and the vulnerable. The third is the focus on the private sector. And then the fourth pillar is, if you will, the overall economic stimulus. Now, as far as cities are concerned, I mean, we really need targeted investments, both to cities and to local governments, because they are in the front line of addressing this emergency, together with public health authorities and disaster risk management agencies. But also within cities, we need to focus on those who need help the most. And, you know, the poor and the vulnerable have been very seriously affected in cities. And our estimates is that there will be, you know, possibly upward of 100 million so-called new poor, and those do on account of losses of jobs, livelihoods, and income, will be vulnerable to falling back into poverty. Now, to flatten the curve, you're talking about, for instance, the enforcement of confinement, social distancing, these types of policies, all the regulations that deal with closure of private facilities, public facilities, places of gathering, and all the regulation that goes to and the enforcement that goes in there. And then obviously there is all the work that cities would need to do on maintaining essential services, you know, things like waste management, policing, etc. Because I mean, a city cannot stop functioning, but at the same time redeploying staff in non-essential services towards the front line. And then the role of cities in terms of addressing affected livelihoods in those places where social distancing is impractical.
I want to give a very serious human face to the people who are facing this tragedy. We talk about 1 billion people who are slum dwellers. But what this particular COVID crisis has shown, that while we were somehow, as Shack Dwellers International, counting people who live in informal habitats, we hadn't acknowledged or understood the volume of migrants who are single men and women who come into the city to work, who don't have identifications, who don't have who don't have any registration for what work they do, and who are today, at least in India, about 15 to 17 lakhs, I don't know how much it is in millions, 117 million people who have been trapped in the place where they work because the public transport has been closed. And now gradually different states are trying to help them to come back. So whether you are a slum dweller or a pavement dweller or a squatter or a homeless person, and if you're a migrant, you are presently completely excluded from any form of entitlement in the city. So even when people give you food, it is treated as charity, when all of us are saying it is an entitlement. The city is closed down for a national and an international reason. It is the public responsibility to feed and look after them. That's not happening in a complete sense in most of our countries. The second very important thing is that our municipalities and our representatives in many countries are still conducting evictions. Just imagine what a crisis that is for families that are almost having more people stay with them because they were trapped in the informal settlement. They don't have food enough to eat. Now they have to face evictions. Now, the third thing which I want to bring up, which is to bring in a face to this, is in most of our countries, we have ancient, 2-century-old laws about pandemic, which are terrible, which are still being operationalized. And I think both Maimuna and Sameh, you should look at these. And when you advise your national governments and our national governments, you have to look at these punitive laws and look at ways by which the face of the state is not a harasser, but as a trustworthy, caring and supporting institution, which it is not today. The police beat up people who come out to buy vegetables and sell them to their neighborhood because there are no vegetables in informal settlements. The other thing which is coming to bite everybody is that routine development of the provision of water, sanitation, basic amenities does not exist. In a place like Dharavi, which is presently in the world view, there are 175 community toilets with inadequate water and safety safety tanks that are overflowing because everybody is now at home and shitting over there. So when we speak to international organizations, they say, oh, we've targeted your city, it's happening there. We are not asked what we'd like to do with that money. We are not discussed with, and when things are not even coming our way, we can't protest. And finally, what I want to say is that COVID-19, like nothing else in the last 50 years, has demonstrated that you cannot have different things for different people. You can't have a strategy of confinement and distancing that works for the elite and then expect the poor to just muddle along. Even WHO doesn't have systems that it can tell us. We are all manufacturing these as we go, but they are not legitimated.
The biggest challenge we face in the world is where this aggregation of challenges, where the pandemic is now front and center, only leads to better health systems. And then with the next pandemic, we might be a little bit better prepared, but with gender inequality, slums, conflict, water insecurity, of course, climate hitting us front and center already, we just became more vulnerable. The second is that we are as strong as the weakest link, as we like to say, and ODA and aid and everything is only connected to GDP around the world. And with an economy that is failing, the trickle-down effect of the disastrous trickle-down effect of this is that where the money should at least be stable and secure, it will actually lack. And it's a double budget cut because ODA is cut because of GDP. And at the same time, we invest a lot in the pandemic response. And that means that our normal budget on the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, the investments when they have to go to climate are lacking. So that will be the second vulnerability is that we shy away from this perverse idea that ODA and GDP, it's an ambition, it's not a maximum. And then I think the crisis, while it is devastating and too many people are hit hard, also should be the opportunity to really look at the interdependencies between health, gender, security, water, climate, urbanization, slums, equity, equality, opportunities, and so forth. We should be ready for this, and especially in cities. So how to capacitate cities in such a way, and I really look at Baimuma and the banks and Sheila, how to develop those programs from the ground up, identify first opportunities, perhaps even start small, and based on those interventions, out of a comprehensive assessment, start to build up capacity. Normally what you would do is you need time for the assessment, then you build policies and programs, and then you start to invest in projects. With a crisis, you don't have that time, so you turn the cycle around. But the question, especially to the financial sector and the policymakers, is shy away from only responding to this crisis and focusing on health, but look across the full SDG cycle. Last, of course, is how this connection between, and I really like the way Secretary General Guterres said it. It's a time of science and solidarity, which is so true in words, but so hard in practice. How we, as partners, as we sit in this panel, WRI, the World Bank, UN Habitat, the NGO, Sheila, with her massive network and capacity, and me from national government, how we can bridge these divides. And I think that to your last question, Rogier, the way a national government can sit on the ground and co-invest in an enabling environment, the millions needed to spend our billions right, is going to be tested and critically important. So we have an urban agenda, we have a SDGs, but what do they now really mean? This is going to be the biggest challenge. The places where I work, Latin America, Africa, and Asia, and the communities that I now only have on WhatsApp, that are really vulnerable, that are only focusing on safe drinking water and better health and food, that future is not on their radar. It is our obligation to continue to have that future on their radar in the solutions we provide them and in the capacity we bring to those communities.